Are you in Texas? Where are you, Jim?
Yeah, I'm in Austin, my home here.
What's the painting behind you?
Oh, it's a beautiful painting. A friend of mine, Kathy Jones, out of Laguna Beach, California, and she's just a wonderful person. And she just does this almost mystical, mysterious kind of cowboy theme paintings. And
Yeah,
so she
that's cool.
gave me that one. It's very nice. She's a great person.
So we're getting a lot of people in here. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to have a wonderful attendance to hear both of our guest speakers and their conversation, and we're going to start shortly. But while people join us, I just want to let everyone know a little bit of the background of some of these two amazing individuals. First, joining us today is Andrew Romanov. For those of you who don't know, Andrew is the former two-term Speaker of the Colorado House, former head of Mental Health Colorado, and the resident progressive Coloradan. His name is Andrew Romanov. You can find it at andrewromanoff.com. He's running for the U.S. Senate seat, currently occupied by Cory Gardner. And Andrew's been fighting on...
I was just going to say, you might say the seat is vacant in that sense.
That is very true. And Andrew's been fighting on behalf of working class and oppressed communities for decades, first at the Southern Poverty Law Center, fighting the KKK, neo-Nazis, all the way to the Colorado House of Representatives, fighting for education reform. And then right before this coming to the U.S. Senate race, he was at Mental Health Colorado, working to reform Colorado's mental health system and fighting for each individual. But for those of you who don't know, our second distinguished guest, he is a national radio commentator that is carried on over 150 stations, including Radio for Peace International. He's a writer, prolific public speaker, twice elected Texas agricultural commissioner, and is a New York Times bestseller with over 7 books made. His name is Jim Hightower, and he's a populist and progressive leader in the fight for working class people and their families. And if you want to hear stories of people like you and feel emboldened to create the change you're seeking, then you should look no further than Jim Hightower. And with that said, I will turn it over to you, Jim, and you can kick us off for this event.
Well, I'm happy to kick this off. I imagine that the very last thing that Coloradans feel they need is to have a Texan come tell them what they're doing politically. But nonetheless, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but to vouch for this guy, Andrew Romanov, whom I've known for quite a few years now. Years ago, there was a humorist, kind of a precursor to Will Rogers, actually, named Ken Hubbard. And he once said that every now and then an innocent man gets sent to the Congress. And that's what we're trying to do right here, is to send somebody who is not innocent in the ways of the world in terms of what's going on. He's not naive, but he is certainly innocent in terms of the pay-to-play money system of politics that has come to dominate our country, including my own party, the Democratic Party. And so I stand with Andrew Romanov because he stands with us. He doesn't need a GPS and a Google map to find the grassroots. He is the grassroots. He comes out of that, and he is a movement politician, by which I mean it's not just elect me and everything's going to be wonderful. It is elect me and I will help build with others a progressive movement that can move our government back to the people and out of the corporate boardrooms. He's willing to stand up to big money, but more importantly, he's willing to stand for the people who are being run over by big money. As was indicated, I was elected, much to the amusement of the people of Texas, to a couple of terms as agriculture commissioner here, and I've seen big money in action. I've seen what it buys. They like to say, oh, well, I'm independent. Yes, I get some money from these corporations, but that doesn't sway me. Well, horse hockey, or as we say out in West Texas, bovine excrement. It is definitely determinant of the agenda itself and then of the positions that are taken on that agenda. So money, we've got to get money out of politics, and we've got to stop saying that, well, I take a little money, but, I'm still independent. I'm still free. No, you're not free. I can tell you that I've seen good people come to the Texas legislature or come to Congress. But then they begin to take those corporate checks, and written on the back of the corporate check is the corporate agenda. And they cash the check, not you, not the candidate, not the political office holder, but the corporations, the special interests cash the check. And that's why we have a heap of hurt in this country, the gross inequality that is just a complete disrespect of the American ideals of fairness and justice and opportunity for all. So I'm with Andrew again because he's with us. And I just add one more thing. This is an election to make a difference, not just to elect a Democrat, but to elect somebody who's going to stand up against the special interests for the common interest, the common good of our country. And one person in the Senate, along with, say, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and others who are standing up, make a huge difference. We can take over the mentality of the Senate of the United States and therefore of the government of the United States to begin to serve people rather than special interests. So with that, I'll give it back to our man, Andrew.
I love Jim Hightower. Jim, thank you. I love you. You're inspiring so many folks I know on this call and across the country. I was reminded of the late, great Molly Ivins' description of you. She said you were the love child. Help me fill this out here. Will Rogers and
Mother Jones.
And Mother Jones. You're living up to your heritage there. I know you have been leading this fight for 4 decades, and there are a lot of folks, environmentalists and farmers and small business owners and working class Americans who look up to you as I do. So thank you for sharing your time. And I'm sorry we're not in person. I know you came out and did an event with me in Boulder. Thanks to our friend John Weiss, who I think is also on this call and runs the Colorado Springs Independent. But I want to say thank you for your independence, your maverickiness, and your leadership and your wit and wisdom, and everything else you bring to so many populist fights across the country.
Maverickiness. We need more.
Jim and I were talking a little bit with Brendan before the show started here, and I guess I'll acknowledge where I am because it's a little dark in more ways than one. My dad is in hospice, and I'm in Ohio visiting with him. He's asleep now and peaceful and doesn't have a lot of time left. And this is a really hard time for my family and me, like so many other families I know, because you all reached out and told me you've gone through the same thing. I was struck in the conversations we had with the hospice team a couple of days ago that one thing we don't have to worry about because my dad can afford it is how to pay for it. I've been running an ad on TV for the last couple of weeks that says, when you're fighting for your life, you shouldn't have to worry about how to pay for it. And too many people do. In the richest nation on the face of the earth, 500,000 families are going bankrupt because they can't afford their medical bills. At least 35,000 Americans, likely a lot more, are dying because they can't afford to see a doctor. So one of the priorities Jim and I share, and most Americans share, is a system of Medicare for all that includes long-term care. We got to add some benefits to Medicare that aren't part of the package now, like dental and vision and hearing, and long-term care, whose costs are just crippling too many families across the country. So I will fight with everything I've got to make sure that we deliver on that promise. And it is not just frustrating, it's infuriating to me to see not only Republicans, whose opposition we expected, but Democrats parrot the talking points of the insurance industry and pretend as if the system we've got now is working. I guess it is working for some people at the very top and for the insurance companies and the drug companies that profit from our pain, but it's not working for the rest of us. And Jim's right. I mean, this election is awfully important, but it's a chance not just to replace Cory Gardner or flip the Senate or switch from red to blue, although all that matters. It's really the chance to my mind at least, to shift from paralysis to progress on all of the important priorities we share. We're going to take your questions on these issues, but I want to say to Jim, thank you for your friendship and your leadership and your kindness, especially at this time. And thanks to the folks who are writing in with their hugs as well.
Well, a joy to be with you. And one thing I would just emphasize is Medicare for all. And ironically, Donald Trump and gang last night filed a motion in the Supreme Court to do away with Obamacare. That's 23 million people who would be thrown off in the middle of a pandemic that is killing thousands and thousands of Americans, and a pandemic that is growing worse, by the way. In my state of Texas and Florida, Arizona, and places that thought they were arrogant enough, the Republican governors of those places, arrogant enough, think they could avoid this and they would just reopen the economy. Well, the COVID-19 doesn't get frightened by Republican governors. It continues to expand. So that's why we've got to have a real healthcare system that represents people.
It's really, I mean, I'm glad you made this point, and it's ridiculous and dangerous and unconscionable to say, hey, we're already fighting this pandemic. Let's make it worse. Well, let's not settle for just 72 million Americans who don't have insurance or enough insurance. Let's make sure to add even more. I mean, what the hell? I'm sorry, I know this is a family channel. What the heck are these guys thinking? I mean, I've seen estimates that suggest as many as 43 million Americans may lose their employer-based coverage this year. Maybe this is a point where we should say, you know what, tying your insurance to your employment, never a great idea. It's a disaster. Maybe the pandemic actually forces us to re-examine everything we've been doing and move in a different direction. At least it should force us, it seems to me, to recognize a truth that you've been preaching, Jim, throughout your career, which is that your health depends on my health and vice versa, that we're all connected here. Isn't that, it should be obvious in the middle of a contagious outbreak here.
Well, it's a founding principle of America itself, the notion that we're all in this together. Right. And now we're finding with this little microscopic thing that we can't even see or quite understand what it is, that not only are we in this together, but it is unintimidated by economic plutocracy. And a healthcare system benefits the few. A lot of rich people are finding out that, hello, COVID-19 affects us too. And if you sneeze, I might get it. So we are connected to this, and we have to really emphasize that, because there's an effort by Trump and by the Republican leadership, certainly in the Senate, but also by too many of our Democrats, as you indicate, to say, oh, well, you know, it's okay now. We should just go back to business as usual. But business as usual is going to kill us. And I not only mean that literally, but I mean it also symbolically in terms of kill the American ideal of we're all in this together.
Yeah, it's a good point. The coronavirus, I don't think, is stopping to check for insurance forms on the way to infecting folks. Yeah, fair enough. Brendan, I know we've got a ton of questions that are coming in. Happy to take those too, but I really appreciate it. People are sharing their sympathies with me, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank you all in the chat.
Absolutely. We have quite a few questions if we want to move towards that section, but Jim, if you wanted to leave us with anything in that regard before we move there, we could also do that.
Well, I think, you know, so many of the issues that you're carrying, I mean, healthcare, of course, is right on everybody's mind right now. But you know, Andrew's out there on all sorts of big, bold issues, including getting money out of politics. But the idea of train service, I've been impressed with him carrying that. This is a huge need in our nation, in Western states particularly. You know, if I could get a train to go to Dallas instead of having to take Southwest Airlines to get up there, I would be thrilled with that. Or go to Houston, go to San Antonio, or go to Denver, and then go on beyond that. So that's the kind of forward thinking that makes Andrew's campaign more than just a campaign. It's about what kind of a country we're going to have. I've been doing a lot of work recently on the meatpacking industry. And the COVID-19 crisis that is in there, including in Greeley, Colorado, and elsewhere, the JBS plant, which is a Brazilian-owned empire. We have three giant meat packers in America: JBS out of Brazil, Tyson out of Arkansas, and then Smithfield Foods out of China. They dominate overwhelmingly, like 70, 80% of the meat supplies in our country. And they're just an example of of greed. Lily Tomlin has said, no matter how cynical you get, it's almost impossible to keep up. And meat packers these days have been showing us greed to the extreme. So this is the kind of corporate power that we have to take on. What I call the 6 Bs, the bosses, the bankers, the billionaires, the big shots bastards, and bullshitters who think they're dogs, and we're just a bunch of fire hydrants out here. And that's why we need Andrew Romanov and people like him to stand up to them and for us.
I'm just going to concede the metaphor battle right now to you. I'm just declaring victory for you on that front. You mentioned the JBS meatpacking plant, Jim, and we had a woman who works at that plant whose father was deathly ill with COVID. He's in recovery now, along with a meat cutter from a grocery store, both part of UFCW. The Local 7 endorsed our campaign, and we had a virtual town hall where they were talking about the conditions. It's been one of the worst outbreaks in the state at that plant up in Greeley. And all she wanted, she didn't come on to ask us for some kind of private plane or a corporate suite or any other special perks. All she was begging for was the right to come home at the end of the day. That's it. I don't think that's too much to ask for in America. That she'd be able to go to work in a place that's safe and healthy and doesn't expose her to a deadly disease, so that she can come home to her family at the end of the day. I was really struck by her plea and by the knowledge that the company where she works apparently doesn't think that's terribly important, because they haven't put in place, or at least hadn't at the time we were talking to them, the kind of protection she needs, let alone the sick pay, the hazard pay, the benefits and compensation that she deserves.
Well, thank you both for that conversation. We're going to transition to a Q&A period now. So there are quite a few questions, and so I'm going to put them to groups by topic for you to make it a little bit easier and to make sure people have their questions answered. The first question is about climate change and renewable energies. This is from Michael Smith, from John Wise, and they deal with one, the difference between Andrew, yourself, and Hickenlooper on global warming, fracking, and climate change, but also two, is there a way we can come back from this? Will you commit to renewable energies and the like?
I'll tackle the first part of the question. The answer to the second question is yes, I'm committed. I'm all in when it comes to rescuing life on Earth. Those are the stakes. And there are real differences in the race. Cory Gardner is a lost cause, right? He takes more money from the fossil fuel industry than all but one other member of Congress. And I think, by the way, that honor goes to John Cornyn. Yes. Jim will be. So Cory's right, nipping at his heels when it comes to taking money from the oil and gas industry. And it's not a great surprise. Senator Gardner sits on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So those companies get something in return, and we get the bill. But there are differences in the primary, too. I support the Green New Deal. I want to end the $650 billion a year in direct and indirect subsidies we're providing for the fossil fuel industry. I'd rather put that money into solar and wind and other renewables, increase energy efficiency, not as sexy as renewables, but we know the cheapest energy of all is the kind you don't use. I want to put fossil fuel workers to work in this clean energy economy, so we don't force them to pick between protecting their paychecks and protecting the planet. And I want to provide protections for frontline communities, those that have borne the brunt of the kind of runaway oil and gas development that Governor Hickenlooper presided over. He never met a permit he wouldn't approve. It literally drank the fracking fluid, not a metaphor, it's just a strange idea. Sued communities that tried to protect themselves and restrict fracking, opposes the Green New Deal. In fact, Jim, you may have heard Hick's line during the presidential race. He not only opposes the progressive agenda that you and I share, he compares these proposals, in his words, on video, you can look it up, to the discredited ideas of Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin. That's what we're up against. He finished, at least Gardner stops with Marx. Hick finds some way to compare us to Stalin. Pretty outrageous.
Marx.
Which of the Marx brothers he's
gotta be a joke. And of course we have similar characters here in Texas in government. But an important thing about what you're advocating there is not just the greenness of it, and as you say, not to save Earth. Earth will survive. It's the life on Earth that will not survive, including us humanoids. But just equally important is the economic potential for this country to move into a green economy, jobs that are for the future, not of the past, and jobs that are good paying and obviously environmentally sound.
But it seems to me also, given your work on as Agriculture Commission, there's an opportunity for us to engage farmers, right? And using cover crops or other regenerative agricultural techniques so that we can pay them to sequester, to store the carbon itself. They can be part of this solution. And many of them are, and some Mike Bowman make a pitch for him.
Agriculture is the thing, and not just organics, regenerative. Take care of that soil, and the soil will take care of the plants, and they'll take care of you. So that's the idea behind it, and it actually works. So yes, the farmers are the solution, not the problem.
And thank you for that question in the chat. But the second sort of topic that we want to shift to is healthcare. And I'll address this to you, Jim, because the questioner had asked. But Dennis asked, how can we get universal healthcare to be embraced by the National Party in the national platform? How can we create unity on this issue? And then, Andrew, if you want to take that question as well.
Well, we're getting there already. I mean, obviously, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris and others have come out for Castro and others are on this program. So it is pretty much the program of the Democratic progressive wing of the party. One way is to put it in your own state platform. We did that here in Texas. The state Democratic Party has embraced Medicare for all. We have a program at a state level, not just calling on national government to do it, but that we can do it here in Texas. We call it Medicare for y'all. And people are responding positively to that. For one thing, it saves huge amounts of money for the county governments that are just being socked by the indigent care bill that they receive. So we just go to people with it. Now couldn't have a better time, or I should say a worse time than we now have in healthcare to make the argument that, hey, we all need healthcare.
Well, that's my pitch too. And look, I think you're right. The pandemic is a teachable moment for all of us to say this experiment we've conducted for the last 80 years that makes your coverage depend on your job isn't working. We've already seen about 28 million Americans with no insurance and 44 million underinsured before the pandemic hit. And now those numbers are only going up. So to me, at least, the big question in this race is what we do next. Do we just go back to normal, resume business as usual? I say no, because normal wasn't working. Business as usual was already creating a wider gap between rich and poor than at any point since the Great Depression, with racial inequality now exposed and exacerbated by this crisis as well. We can talk about that if you want. I think you're asking a little bit, Brendan, about how we get there. And to my mind, at least, one plan is to lower the age of Medicare eligibility. Vice President Biden has actually moved on this issue to say, yeah, maybe we can lower Medicare eligibility to 60. I'd like to get down to 0. You could start in the other direction. You could start by covering all kids, but eventually you need everybody in this single universal risk pool, which is the point of insurance, right? To spread the risk, to cover the sorts of things over which we sometimes have no control. And I think this may be a time where finally we get not just the national will, because there's broad consensus among the public, but translate that consensus into action. And it has to be us. We got to be leading this fight. We can't expect the Republicans to join us yet until they pay a price for opposing it. I just don't want to force us to negotiate against ourselves like we've done too often in the past, or start the negotiations at the 50-yard line.
Yeah, that's the importance of you going to the Senate. You carry that message from the people inside, and that's what makes change. You can't win progressive fights inside, because that's where money matters. But you can, if you bring the people inside, then you can win those fights. And the people are aware. They know very well that, I mean, it's a huge issue among farmers, as well as low income folks. Well, farmers are kind of low income these days. And, a farmer friend of mine once said, Hightower, status quo is Latin for the mess we're in. And but we can't just do the status quo. We've got to make big change, and Medicare for all is one of those changes.
Thank you so much for discussing those two important topics. We're coming close to the end of our time together. And so, Andrew, I want to give you the last remarks and tell people in the last days of the primary election how they can best use their time to help you.
Well, that was quick. I talked too long. I want to say thanks to Jim Hightower for his leadership and his time today. And I want to ask to everybody who is in Colorado and eligible to vote, I want to ask for your vote. It's too late to put the ballot in the mail. You got to find a drop-off location. And I think, Brendan, if you share a link, it might be Go Vote Colorado. You can find a drop-off center near you. The ballots have to be received by Tuesday, the 30th. I'm a little worried that people are just going to put them in the mail on Monday or Tuesday and think a postmark is good enough. It's not. In order to count, in order to choose the Democratic nominee, you got to make sure the ballot is actually in one of those drop-off sites by Tuesday, June 30th. You can chip into the campaign. It's not too late to help us keep up our digital and television presence. I just asked my team if money still matters. They assured me it does. We're being massively outspent. Jim mentioned throughout this conversation the role that big money plays in politics, and we're seeing that in this race. Even though the other guy is decrying all the dark money, he's benefiting from more than $4 million in spending out of DC or other anonymous donors. They won't have to disclose their names until after the election, conveniently enough. So it's going to take a lot of people power to make up for all the corporate cash on the other side. And you all can chip in if you go to andrewromanoff.com, or Brendan can share a link, andrewromanoff.com/yes. So you can vote, you can contribute, and you can help us contact other voters. We're doing this around the clock by text and phone and Zoom, trying to reach as many people as we can, because we know that most people haven't voted yet. About 2.4 million registered Democrats and unaffiliated voters got this ballot in their mail earlier this month. Most of those ballots haven't come back yet, which means this race is very much in play. And we've seen a huge shift from the fall, when we were like 50 points down, to the last time we took a poll, which put the race within 12 points. I think the momentum, at least we've experienced, suggests the race may be closing even further. We haven't encountered a lot of enthusiasm for Hicks' candidacy from anyone, including him. He said he'd be a terrible senator and didn't want the job, would hate it, wasn't cut out for it. I believe him.
Well, thank you both for
Can I give Jim
us.
Do we have time? Are we going to get cut off? I just want Jim to have the last word, because he's got the best. Unlike the president, Jim Hightower actually has all the best words.
Well, the last word is go Romanov. And even Texans benefit from this, because, you know, a United States senator is not just going to help the people of Colorado, he'll help the people of every state.
I'll try to make up for Ted Cruz, and hope you guys can get rid of Cornyn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And everyone here will get an invite if you RSVP. You'll get links and everything afterward to how you can get involved. So don't worry too much about the chat. But again, thank you both for joining us. Jim Hightower, again, I'll post his link as well to his website. And Senate candidate Andrew Romanov, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all attendees for joining us as well and listening to the conversation. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jim.
Yes.